Hey you, and welcome. In this video, we will add Firebase to our project. So let's dive right into it. First things first, let's take a look at what the problem is and what Firebase can do for us. The problem is right now, the contact app that we have built. If I was to add a new contact, like so, say submit, that contact is there. If I go to drawer, I can see the contact is there. That's perfect, that's fine. However, when I refresh the page, that contact is gone. And the reason for that is because all our code that we have written is all front-end code. That means every piece of data is only available for the session that is alive at the moment. If you refresh your page, try to open it in a new tab, anything like that, the data was gone and it resets the entire application. So how do we solve for that? Well, that's where database come in handy. And databases, servers, they can be a little tricky to work with. So Firebase is a cloud solution that makes it easy for us to spin one up without any extra effort. So let's take a look at Firebase. I have Firefox open. I'm on the Firebase landing page. It's on firebase.google.com and it gives you a good overview of it. It is a Google product, so you have to have a Google account to work with it. If you don't have one, do create a Google account and we will sign in using that account. So on the top right hand corner, I'll click on sign in and I'll log in using one of my Google accounts. With me signed in, now I can click on go to console on the top right hand corner and I can go directly to the Firebase console. It will start by asking me, do you want to create a project? In this case, yes, I do want to start creating a project. So let's click on that. The project name, you can name it whatever. I'll just call it contact app with a dash. And I accept the terms. I confirm the Firebase exclusive purposes. Yes, continue. And I will use the analytics portion here, so I'll just keep that active. And United States is fine. If you want to change that, I don't know if Canada would be there. Yeah, Canada is there. I'll use Canada then. Use the settings default. Yes, I accept and create project. Seems like my project is ready to go. I'll click on continue and that should take me to the dashboard. Perfect. In this dashboard, I can see a bunch of items on the left-hand side. That's the sidebar. In the sidebar, the build area is really where we're going to be spending most of our time because as developer, build area applies to you. Firebase has categorized the same products in different groups or categories, and one category that applies to us is build. In this build category, the ones we will be looking at will be authentication. We'll add authentication to our app. Firestore database. There are two databases, Realtime and Firestore. I'll work with Firestore because it scales better. So that's the one we'll work with. We will work with storage as well. We'll try to upload images using the storage API. We will use hosting. So this app that we're building will not just be local on your computer. You can host it for free and that should be available to the internet, which is great. We will also be using functions in our app, which is the functions in the build section for Firebase. One more thing to look at, if I go back to the Firebase homepage, the landing page, under more, there's a pricing section, and it is a free product for the most part. When you do scale, when you start seeing your app working really well, a lot of customers, a lot of visitors, then you may end up incurring some cost. However, we are going to stick with the Spark plan, which is the free plan. So if you run into limitations or you run into a blocker, chances are is because you don't have a credit card on file. That's why the limitation will stop your website from working any further. Whereas if you were on a Blaze plan, you would put a credit card down, you would pay as you go. That means your free tier will still apply. So free tier such as for Cloud Firestore, you get 20,000 writes a day, which is great, which should be enough for a decent running application. If you do go over that, chances are you're making money, and that's why you should be paying your bills on this. So Blaze Plan will make sure that you don't see any service interruption and that your credit card will be charged automatically when the overage happens, and the overage rates are right in the link down there. All right, so just wanted to make sure pricing is clear to everybody. It is free for the most part. I haven't paid a single dime on any Firestore projects, so I'll be fine here. Let's close that. Let's start by adding our app into this Firebase dashboard. So how do we do that? Well, there's a few options down here, iOS, Android, or web app. This is a web app we're working with, so I'll click on that and it will ask me what should be the app name. So I'll call this Contact App Web. I could just call it Contact App, that's fine as well, but I'll just say Contact App Web. It will also be hosted on Firebase. I'll register the app. With the app registered, now it's asking me to make sure we add Firebase SDK into our code base. SDK is a software development kit, as you can see on my screen. I searched it up, and all it is a bunch of code that is given to you that you don't have to write yourself, and that code will help you write some other code. So it's code for code. That's all it is. And we will install that as a NPM module. So I'll close this out. And you would notice that it says npm install Firebase will install the existing code that you need to work with, which is the SDK. So I'll go back to my CLI. Inside my contact app, I will run that command, and that should install my Firebase npm module into my app. Let's close the CLI. And if I go further down, that's telling me to start a Firebase app in your code like so. So I can just copy paste and dump this code in my VS Code. I will go to File Explorer, and in the utils, I have a utils folder here. If you don't have one, create a new folder, create a utils folder, and then inside there, I'll create a new file, call it firebase.ts. We're working with TypeScript, so make sure it's TS, not JS. Paste the whole thing in, hide the File Explorer. I think we're good. There's a bunch of extra lines. Great, I took away those extra lines that we had. Next thing I would do is create a environment variable for each one of these items in the configuration. And to do so, I'll go over to my File Explorer, right on the root, not inside the src, but right on the root of my directory. I will start a new file, call it .env. And that's where I can start the environment variables. If I look at the documentation that Create React App provides us, Create React App has custom environment variables built in, and in order to work with that, we have to append React underscore app underscore at the beginning of our environment variable name, and that will make it available on runtime. And if I scroll further down, it will show me all the files that I can work with right here. So what other files are there? So I'm working with .env. That's usually what I would work with, but there is also .env.local, which is more for secrets or overrides. .env.development, that means you're in the development environment versus test environment or production environment. So there's tons of these .env files that we can work with. I'll just work with .env since our use case is pretty narrow, but there are other ones available. And a sample of that would be, you can name your variable like so. So React underscore app underscore, and then whatever your variable name would be. And you would notice that they're all uppercase. There's no lower cases in that. That's just a convention. So we're going to follow that convention. So I'll go over to my VS Code. In my .env, I will copy over the Firebase config variables from firebase.ts. So let me just hide my File Explorer. Let's go to firebase.ts, copy all of these over to env. Great. And then I'll start writing React underscore app underscore API should be uppercase and key should be uppercase. I'll separate them by underscore so they make sense and the words are separated. We don't need a semicolon there or colons there. We don't need double quotes, although it is a good habit. So maybe I'll keep the double quotes and take away the comma at the end. So there's a few things we have to change. We have to refactor our code. Let me just clean it up nicely. Great. I'll keep the double quotes. I will take away colon. We don't need those. And I will replace the colons with equal to. And there we are. And I will change the names of my variables to match accordingly. With my environment variables ready to go, I will copy all the lines over to firebase.ts right under line number 2, and I will destructure them out of process.env. So if I go over to my documentation by Create React App, it says that in process.env, the global variable, you can destructure out whatever your environment variable name would be, and that's what I'm going to do. So I will call a const destructure out of process.env. This is a globally available variable to us. I'll move all of these variable names inside my const curlies. There we are. And then using the VS Code multi-line selector, I'll just take them all away and replace all of that with comma. So that way I destructure all these variable names. Now I can copy paste them and replace them with the actual values. With my variables typed up, I will go ahead and save my firebase.ts. Now I do have to refresh my app or restart the server. Every time you make changes to .env file, the server doesn't just pick it up automatically. You have to restart your server. So I'll go over to my CLI, stop the server, Control C, clear it out, npm start, and that should restart my app with the new env variables so we don't miss out on anything. I'll hide my CLI and refresh the app. Nothing has changed. Now we can start using our Firebase app. If I go over to Firefox in the Firebase, let's see what's next. If I click on next, it's also telling me to install the Firebase CLI. We will be using that in the later video, so go ahead and do that. I already have it installed, so I don't really have to. But once you install Firebase tools, if you go to your CLI, you should be able to do Firebase-V, and you should have access to the version number of the Firebase command, or sorry, -- version. I think that's the one. There we go. I'm on 11.21. Of course, at the time of this recording, that's the version, but you can, of course, install the newer version. They work exactly the same way. I'll go ahead and press next in the Firebase dashboard, scroll down, and it's telling me to run these commands for our Firebase login. So I'll run the first one, Firebase login. That should open a browser for me, and I should be able to just sign in. I signed in using my Google account, and it's asking me for a few permissions, which are fine. I'll go ahead and allow that. And once that is allowed, if I go back to my CLI, I can see that it's logged in. Next in the Firebase dashboard, it's asking me to do Firebase init. And this has to be run inside the directory of your application. If you run it outside, it does initialize the Firebase application, but it doesn't really work for us. Make sure you run it in the contact app. So if I go back to CLI, I'm going to make sure my present working directory is contact app, and I'll just do Firebase init. Perfect. Now it's going to ask me a few questions. Let me just make this bigger so it's easier to view. And it's interactive, so I can scroll down and up using my arrow keys, and I can select things using spacebar. I will want to work with functions in the future, so let's select that, and hosting to host our app later on. I'll press enter. Use existing, yes, and use contact app that we just created. It's asking me whether I want to use JavaScript or TypeScript, and yes, I want to use TypeScript, keep it consistent throughout the app. And I'll say yes, use ESLint configuration. Install dependencies, yes, use npm to install dependencies. Next, it's asking me, what do I want to use as my public directory? Usually it would be public, however, Create React App gives us a build, so I'll work with build, like so. And configure as a single page app, yes, that's a single page app. Set up automatic builds using GitHub, not as of yet, we may do it later on. There we are. All right, perfect. So my Firebase setup is done. Let's take a look at what it did for us. If I go back to VS Code and look at the File Explorer, there is now a functions directory, and that functions directory is its own NPM application, has its own node module that up top has src with index.ts that has just a import of functions from Firebase functions, and we can write some functions underneath, which is great. We won't be using it just yet, but it's good to know that this exists. I'll hide my functions, close this index.ts. And what else is there? I think there's a Firebase src or Firebase RC file. That's just to keep track of what project this application should be linked with. And then Firebase JSON that has a bunch of information about what did we select initially. If we do make modifications later on using Firebase CLI command, it would just use this to have context of what had happened in the past. So we don't have to redo the step all the time. Perfect. Let's go back to Firefox. Last command it asked me to run is Firebase deploy. There is one more step we have to do before we run the Firebase deploy. In the functions in the src index.ts, you can see that there is a error message. So if I comment this out, I think this should be fine. I'll go ahead and do Firebase deploy now. Okay, I run into this error message. This error message is saying that my project could not enable an API, and the reason for that is because I need to be on the Blaze right there, Blaze pay-as-you-go plan. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to enable Blaze pay-as-you-go. I'm going to put a credit card down, and that should get us going. We can change our plan by going to the Firebase dashboard, and underneath I can click on upgrade on the top bottom left hand corner, and I can select Blaze, continue. Yes, I agree and continue. Canada, yes, that's where I am. Firebase payment, and now I have to add a bunch of address information. I've added the payment information. Now it's asking me what should be the budget of your application. I can just work with $0. That means never charge me, and I'll go ahead and continue. And that would work. It would notify me as soon as I reach the plan limit, which I've never really reached, and it would just stop charging me. So putting the credit card is just a formality. If you do want to skip that, you can take away the hosting package and just work with the functions only, which would just work fine. I just wanted to make it so that we can publish our application, and that should work fine. All right, I'll close this out, and we are on the Blaze package. I'll go back to my CLI and run the same command, Firebase deploy again. The command ran successfully. The deploy is completed. I can look at the console clicking on this link, or I can go to the hosting URL, which is contact app 88C03. Not the best domain name, but that's the one that we can go to see our app. So I'll click on that domain name, and there we are. My application is working just fine. I can click on John's name, Sally's name. I can add new contact, submit, and it submits that. I can click on different users, delete one. Is working exactly as you would expect. So that's our hosting completed. Whenever we make changes, we can just do Firebase deploy on CLI, and it will give us the new application deployed along with functions deployed. So if I go over to my Firebase dashboard, let's take a look at what these things look like. So if I go to build, and there is a hosting section, and in the hosting section, I can see the app domain names, the current domain, so you can also see the history of every deploy that you do. And if by any chance you made a deploy that broke the app, you want to revert or you want to roll back, you can just click on that and you can roll back to your previous version that they have already hosted for you. That's why we needed the Blaze package, because the Google Firebase is going to keep track of every push that you ever make using Firebase deploy. And next thing would be in the build. Under functions, we don't have any functions registered just yet, which is fine. We commented that portion out. We will be writing more in the later videos. So yeah, that's pretty good so far. I do want to do one more thing. In build, I go to Firestore database, and in the Firestore database, I'll create a new database. I'll start it in test mode. I don't want to do production mode just yet. And I'll press next, and I'll go ahead and enable. There we go. Our database is created. I'll see you all in the next video.